I'm going to be talking about human trafficking and modern-day slavery. It's what we call it now. So every day there are 4.3 million people that are being subject either to labor exploitation or sex exploitation. And it's important to call them modern slaves, because if we don't learn to add the temporality of the type of slavery that we're living, it's going to be really hard to identify of whom we're talking about, and our expectations of where we might find them will change. So talking about how a modern slave will look like is important, but it's also important to identify how modern slavery is happening, when it's happening, and by whom. Who is being directly or indirectly involved in the process, knowing or not knowing that they're being involved in the process. And what's surprising is that from those 40 million people that are being forced into modern slavery, only 1% of them are actually identified and actually receive access to justice. And this 1% is not only true for my country, Mexico, it's also true for the whole world. Sometimes it depends on the estimation, we will not even reach that 1% being identified of victims. Now, it's actually not that hard to identify victims. We've often and recently, just this year, found victims in busy streets, in the internet, while reaping apples in the border with the US, or while crossing a border while migrating. And these are just some of these examples. And our guesses is that some of the reasons we've not been able to identify these victims and to successfully get them to justice, give them access to justice, is because one, perhaps we're not even looking for them. Two is we're not asking the right questions to be able to identify the logistics of how modern slavery is actually happening. And we might not be very efficient telling those people that may be key actors the small responses, the information, the data that we actually have about human trafficking. For example, I don't know if you knew, but 80% of the victims that are crossing borders are going through official checkpoints undetected. This means that victims are being moved around in international airports, in bus terminals, and that we've not been able to notice them. And also let me tell you that every week, we're an NGO, and every week in Mexico City, in our geographic location, we get more than 5 or 6 cases of missing minors all the time, families looking for children that have been contacted and extracted through social media. And did you also know that, and this is a discovery, I would think that it would be really obvious, but for us it's definitely a discovery, is that human trafficking actually utilizes the structure of cities. The infrastructure that we use, it's the same that human trafficking actually utilizes. So, for example, in the tourism sector, I'm going to give the Mexican Caribbean as a huge example. The Mexican Caribbean is well known for being a hotspot for sex trafficking in children, and it uses our hotel and motel structure, taxi networks to offer the services, to surveil and control victims. Trafficking is using bank services. They're using social media. They're using all of the same structure that we use. They travel like we travel. And this should give us an insight of some of the solutions that we can push forward to actually interrupt the logistics from happening, interrupt the logistics of human trafficking. And some things we've been wondering, and we were just telling to ourselves, what if we could actually use modern tools to combat a modern crime that's actually structured like a business? What if we could make that business harder? What if we could make it imposibilitarlo, like we would say in Spanish? Make it harder and harder for victims to be moved around in our cities, for children to be exploited in Tulum, in Cancun, that you must have visited probably. And the thing is that today it's easy for that to happen. And it's possible, and we've already started doing certain agreements that have been very strategic and that have started to have an impact. Sin Trata, the organization that I founded and preside, is a non-governmental institution, organization, and we have 8 years of experience. And in these 8 years, we've literally experimented many things. And just this, in 2018, we started collecting information and started to try to systematize information. And in 2018 as well, we had our first technological partnership with a tech giant that is Uber in Mexico. And we realized, so what would the potential for a business like Uber be in the equation of human trafficking? And we realized that, for example, Uber in Mexico has more than 250,000 drivers that are everywhere in the city. It's literally having those many eyes in every corner from morning to evening. And we realized, what if we give them very specific information? If we know actually how human trafficking works, and we can get very specific indicators, then we can give those to key citizens, in this case, drivers, that will be able to identify. And this model has actually scaled. I'm really proud to celebrate with you that this model has actually been scaled and implemented in other countries in Latin America, even in Canada and in the US, a model that was developed by a small NGO that started collecting data on human trafficking. And also, I want to share with you that we'll be having the first results on victims being identified by drivers and operatives taking place. So victims being rescued actually by the information that we're handling today. So what we're doing today is focusing on understanding exactly how, when, and where the logistics of human trafficking is actually taking place, and being able to have a proper conversation with those who are in a key position, key sectors like the tourism, tech, transport sectors, for them to do the right thing, for us together to be able to actually design cities where human trafficking is harder and harder. Thank you so much for this opportunity.